Now, journalism. We want to talk about journalism in this class. We're in a journalism school. Not surprisingly, you're going to find out that we want to support journalism. We want to encourage better journalism. But the first thing you might observe is that not everyone in the public is so enamored with journalism. So we're going to start our conversation about journalism with two harsh realities. Number one, a lot of people in public don't like us. Right? This is a Pew Center poll. Pew Center does some of the best polling in the United States these days. Press accuracy rating hits 2 decades low. Some of you are aspiring journalists thinking about a journalism career. Welcome to a profession that everybody hates. Nobody trusts. Right? There's sort of one thing you can almost be guaranteed no matter where you go in the United States. Everybody hates the news media, yes? People on the right, people on the left, everybody hates the news media. It's the only thing maybe that binds our country. The one thing you can be guaranteed is everybody hates the media. But it is true that this chart, Public Evaluations of News Media, when they poll the public, the public's assessment of the quality of the job that journalism and journalists are doing is going down. It was not high in the beginning, and it is going down. So harsh reality number one, the public doesn't much like us. Doesn't mean they don't watch, read, listen to us, but it means that at least they tell pollsters they don't much like us. Harsh reality number two, the business model that has sustained the corporate commercial journalism, which is the heart of the American journalism system, is in free fall. That is to say, the way that journalism has made money over the years in a news media system that is overwhelmingly corporate and commercial, the business model for that journalism is in free fall. What do I mean by that? Let's go back and remind ourselves that the news media system in the United States, as I said, is overwhelmingly corporate and commercial. It's organized around for-profit businesses that are organized primarily in the corporate form. If you look at the Austin American-Statesman, it is a corporate commercial news operation. It's commercial. It's for-profit. It's corporate. The Austin American-Statesman is a wholly owned subsidiary of Cox Communications based in Atlanta. Most of the media, the news media that you watch, read, and listen to in this country is corporate and commercial. They're a for-profit business typically owned by media conglomerates, as we call them, large corporations that own lots of media properties. There are other forms of journalism in the United States. There is a small public broadcasting component. NPR, we have a station on campus. KUT Radio is a National Public Radio affiliate. Public Broadcasting Service, KLRU Television, public television. But the public sector in the United States is very small compared to other comparable countries. We have a very, very small public broadcasting system, overwhelmingly corporate and commercial. There are alternative or independent journalism outlets off on the margins. Important, just as public broadcasting is important, but very small. So we're dealing with a news media system in the United States that's overwhelmingly for-profit, corporate commercial journalism. And the business model for that journalism is in free fall. At one point in the history of this country, owning a news media property, such as a daily newspaper or a television station, was like a license to print money. You couldn't go wrong owning a newspaper or a broadcast station. Right? Media properties were wildly profitable. Through much of my lifetime, post-World War II era, media corporations had profit margins that were unheard of in other industries. Media corporations made 20, 30, 40% profit margins. For those of you who know the business world, you know that's extraordinary. Other industries would love to have profit margins like that. Right? But that has all changed. And the reasons for that change are complex, but there's two things that happened. One is that media corporations got bigger over the last 2 or 3 decades. Media conglomeration, we call it. Big corporations started buying up more and more properties. Right? You had newspaper corporations that owned hundreds of newspapers. Now, those media corporations were corporations, and corporations live and die by one criteria. What is that? What is the only criteria on which corporations evaluate their success? Profit. Profit and loss. And in these large publicly traded corporations that owned all of these media properties, the bottom line became more and more important. Right? Quarterly profits. Not the long-term health of the media property, not the way the media property served its community, but profit and nothing but profit became increasingly the only criteria on which decisions were made. And there are lots of folks who would argue that that systematically weakened journalism over the last 2 or 3 decades. That this media conglomeration started to undercut the quality and commitment of news media operations to real journalism. Okay. People will argue about that, but that's one of the factors. The other factor is much more obvious. The rise of digital media, the rise of the internet, and the way that much of the revenue that used to be pretty safe for newspapers and broadcast stations was no longer safe. The most obvious example is the way that Craigslist did in classified advertising at newspapers. You know Craigslist, yes? If you all want to buy or sell something, do you place an ad in the Austin American-Statesman's classified advertising section, or do you put it on Craigslist? How many of you have ever put a classified ad in the paper to sell something? How many of you have ever used Craigslist? Oh, okay. That's why the revenue stream for American journalism is changing. Because digital media offered people a way to do business that did not require them to advertise in daily newspapers or on local TV news. Whereas at one point, those media outlets, what we sometimes call the legacy media, the old media, newspapers, broadcast television stations, broadcast radio stations, at one point they had a near monopoly on advertising revenue in a community. That's no longer the case. In addition to the change in the revenue stream, there's now a proliferation of news sources. If you want to learn about the world, do you have to subscribe to your daily newspaper? No, you don't have to. You can go online and get news for free from all over the world. So these changes that come with the rise of the internet, digital media, changes both in advertising revenue and availability of news, has undermined the business model for contemporary American journalism. Harsh reality number 2, the money that used to sustain journalism as we know it is no longer there, and the industry is in free fall. By free fall, I don't mean the industry is going to evaporate tomorrow. No one really knows, but the industry is flailing around looking for models. Should news media on their websites put up a paywall? Should they force you to subscribe to a website? Well, that might be a solution, because then they can recover revenue by making you pay for the news that you have been reading for free. But if, in fact, they put up a paywall and force you to pay, how many of you will shell out the money for that? Not known. They're experimenting with different models. Nobody really knows where any of this is going. Nobody really knows what the solution to the problem is. But for at least most of the last century in the United States, most journalism was supported by advertising revenue in a corporate commercial setting. There are people, myself included, who would critique that, but for better or worse, for most of the 20th century, most journalism was supported by advertising revenues in a corporate commercial setting. that is no longer a viable system for maintaining the healthy journalism a democracy needs, and we're experimenting. We're making it up as we go along. Some of you may know more about this due to your own experience in media, but all of this is kind of up for grabs now. So before we go into a discussion of the role of journalism in a democratic society, we've got to face two harsh realities. The status of journalism as an institution is at an all-time low in the eyes of the public, and the business model that has supported that journalism is no longer viable. Welcome to the School of Journalism. If you are considering a career in journalism, you are entering a field in which no one will like you and you may not get paid. Well, let me rephrase that. We'll get back to that. I'll come back around to that. It's actually not quite that dire, right? Even though we say that the public doesn't necessarily like journalism, the public still reads and consumes a lot of journalism. Journalism is still important. Even if the business model is in trouble, it doesn't mean that journalism is going to go away. We'll talk more about that throughout the semester. But that is part of the reality we are going to have to deal with. Now,